So, here we go. It's anti-tribe and investigations and ritual abuse, and we are currently about to play you a report on two girls who were found in a freezer truck driven by a man named Jacob Ortell Scott. So here's the news report of Mr. Scott's arrest.
Said the 14 and 12-year-old girls were homeschooled but needed to. Wednesday, Utah Highway Patrol was investigating an accident on the I-15 near Linden. Officials said the semi came up behind slowed traffic and wasn't able to stop before hitting a minivan. Because it was a commercial vehicle, they brought in a truck inspector who noticed something odd.
He took a photo of the rear of the truck, and there was a slight gap in the door, and he happened to see a set of eyes looking at him as he took that photo. And then he knew we had more problems than just the accident.
Lieutenant Clay Morgan says the driver, 28-year-old Jacob Ortell Scott, admitted to having his two younger half-sisters in the back. Officials said the 14 and 12-year-old girls were homeschooled but needed to come to Salt Lake to take a test and help a family member who's having twins. The probable cause statement says the girls had been in the refrigerated trailer, which was cooled to 30 degrees since Huntington, Utah. That's about 2 hours from Linden. Officers said because of the way the door was latched, there was no way for the girls to get themselves out of the trailer. Police arrested Scott on suspicion of aggravated child abuse. They're still investigating the incident. In Salt Lake City,
So just had to make sure that actually was live streaming there. A little overlap. So as you can see from the news report that we just broadcast, here is Jacob Ortell Kingston, or Jacob Ortell Scott, arrested on child abuse charges because when he got into a fender bender on the highway, the Utah Highway Patrol found two girls, I believe ages 12 and 14, in the back of his freezer truck where he was transporting these girls. These girls were supposedly his half-sisters. He was transporting them up from Huntington to Salt Lake, where they were going to assist one of their other siblings who was pregnant and also take a test because they're homeschooled. Now, the first clue here is the name Ortell. Okay, so that's the first clue that we got here. Anyone who's familiar with the Kingston Group would automatically key in on the middle name Ortell because it's indicative of a tie to the man in the watchtower, as the Kingston Group refers to it. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Kingston Group, numbered men rank higher in the hierarchy than unnumbered men. Those men who are given numbers ranging from 9 on down, that's the current living leader of the Kingston Group. His number is 9. As we're going to see in court documents, that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at a man named Jacob Ortell Scott who was transporting girls in a 30-degree freezer truck because, the cab was occupied by Mr. Scott and his passenger. We don't know the identity of the passenger, and we don't know why that passenger wasn't arrested for child abuse. But what we do know is that there were two girls in the back of that freezer truck. And, of course, speculation was rampant that this was sex trafficking in Utah, yet another example of Utah's sexual abuse of children, which is, epidemic at this point. Utah leads the nation in sexual abuse reports and in child abuse in terms of total reports annually. So the state has a serious problem with this. So here we go. We've got Jacob Ortell Scott. He's 28 years old. He's being arrested. He's from Huntington, according to the reports. And, of course, a simple review of Mr. Scott's history would reveal that Mr. Scott is tied to an address in Huntington, Utah, that ties directly to the Kingston Group. So I'm going to show you. Let's see if I can get this to pull up here. So I'm going to show you Mr. Kingston's Mr. Ortell Scott's involvement here with this address. So let me pull it up real quickly because it's very interesting how this works. So let's see here. So our first tie for Mr. Ortell Scott is at 845 West State Road 31, Huntington, Utah. So let me pull that up real quickly. So let's show you voterrecords.com. Let's pull that up real quickly. So as we pull that up, we're going to see if we can get that visible here on OBS. And apparently we're having some trouble here. So let's get rid of that real quickly. And let's do this the old-fashioned way. So let's pull up here a macOS screen capture. So let's pull this up real quickly and let's make sure that that's in fact what's going on. So let's transition here. We've got macOS screen capture. Obviously, I'm something of a noob when it comes to OBS. I'm learning as I go here. So what we should be seeing here is Cheyenne Scott's voter registration. And we should see other people who live at Cheyenne Scott's location. That would be the aforementioned 845 West State Road in Huntington, Utah. Now, seems innocent enough. If we look at the plat locator for Emery County, which is where Anderson is located, which is where Mr. Scott is located and where Cheyenne Scott is located, we see Anderson Family Farms. And what's significant about Anderson Family Farms, they're owned by Ralph and Marcy Anderson. And so what do we get into? We get into all of these tabs here. And we get into a lawsuit that was filed. One of the plaintiffs was Jeremy Roberts. And Jeremy Roberts incorporates the allegations, and he says that at 7 or 8 years of age, he was working at Ralph's Milk Farm in Huntington, Utah, where he worked milking cows, cleaning stalls, driving tractors, selling manure and meat to customers under the direction of Ralph Anderson, the steward of the Orders Farm. So Jeremy worked year-round at 7 or 8 years of age, around 4 hours a day. At about age 12, he started to work 12-hour shifts in the order-owned town of Hiawatha, Utah. And he worked under the direction of another man named Dana Jenkins, building fences and removing thistle by the root. And, of course, abuse was involved. Dana Jenkins whipped Jeremy's younger brother, Caden, who obviously was under 12 years of age, to punish and make an example out of them for the other minors working under Dana Jenkins, including some of the sons of David Kingston, who's a bigwig in the Kingston Group. So he was being paid $3.25 an hour for his work at Ralph's Milk Farm in Hiawatha. Unfortunately for the order or the Kingston Group, the problem is this is child labor. This is child labor trafficking. And so we can see that Farm Fresh, Anderson Family Farms, this is their website. And so they sell raw milk. And of course, if you go over here to contact, you're going to see 987 West State Road 31. So if we go back, let's see if we can pull up that plat map. And let's see what we find when we go to Anderson Family Farms here. So we go to Anderson Family Farms. As you can see from the plat map here, we see Ralph and Marcy Anderson. They own all this property through here, which is exactly where Jacob Ortell Scott and Cheyenne Scott live. So if we go back, we're going to see what I saw earlier, which is Jacob Ortell Scott, 845 West Highway 31. Let's see, Huntington, Utah. And so let's see if we can pull him up. So apparently we cannot. So let's see here. So as we pull up here, what you're seeing is that Anderson Family Farms ties back to the Kingstons based on Jeremy Roberts' civil suit. And this is a civil suit that was filed in 2022. And so Jeremy Robbins sued David Ortell Kingston. Again, the name Ortell, Lynn Roberts, John Daniel Kingston Jr., and David Ortell Kingston. He sought damages against them, and he was represented by Houlihan King and J.R. Law Group PLLC. So, this is a partial list of businesses owned by the order of the Kingston Group. As you can see, it is voluminous. Now, Washakie Renewable Energy wound up in the news because they were the subject of a criminal prosecution for fraud. So as you can see, the law above another diagram, they have Paul Kingston at the top. That is the man in the watchtower. They have the seven brothers, or the order board. They have the numbered men. They have the married unnumbered men. And then they have at the bottom women and children, many of whom are simply breeders. That is, the women are expected to breed children, and the children are expected to provide free labor to the order. Now, why the state of Utah doesn't do anything about this, who knows? But the order is a criminal enterprise. It is a common and unintentional practice in the order to defraud state and federal governments by bleeding the beast, as it were, as illustrated in the operation of its daycare center schools, including the Vanguard Academy, which is a charter school that wound up in a lot of hot water for misuse of taxpayer money. And so what do we have here? We have a situation where this is a criminal enterprise and whatnot. I don't know how well that screenshot came up, but at the end of the day, that's what we're dealing with here. That's who Jacob Ortell Scott, the man in the video that opened this live stream, Uh, this is who he's affiliated with. The addresses line up. The addresses line up with a business of the Kingston Group. Those two girls are his half sisters, which in Kingston terms means that they're appropriate for marriage to a half sibling. Kingston Group has a long standing emphasis on bloodline purity. And the more Kingston blood you have, the better off you are. And so they engage in the marriages of half brothers and half sisters to facilitate that bloodline purity. So that's what we're at in Utah. This is perfectly normal. This is a criminal enterprise operating in plain sight that rips off taxpayers. They call it bleeding the beast, and they feel that they're entitled to do so. And those two little girls in a 30-degree freezer truck transported 2 hours from Huntington up north, where they were eventually ferreted out or detected by the Utah Highway Patrol after a car accident. Those two girls, 12 and 14, were taken into custody, and Mr. John Ortell Scott was arrested for child abuse and denied bail. That's what we're dealing with here. So, as we get into this, let's take a look at Mr. Ortell Scott's information here. Let's take a look at some of the things. I want to pull this up. I think it says booking information. So here is Mr. Ortell Scott's booking information. I'll pull that up. Let's see. So here is Jacob Scott Ortell. He was arrested by the Utah Highway Patrol on September 17th at 9 p.m. He was actually booked at 11:43, even though the accident occurred during the daytime. Born 1986, birth country USA. And of course, what's he being held for? Aggravated child abuse. Reckless aggravated child abuse for having two teenage girls, or two girls. One of them wasn't a teenager, she was 12. In the back of a freezer truck in 30-degree temperatures for 2 hours. So basically, had the Utah Highway Patrol not detected those girls, had they not seen two pairs of eyes peering out the gap in the truck door, the sliding door on the back of that truck, those girls would likely be somewhere in Salt Lake County, being labor trafficked, or God knows what else. So the idea that the state of Utah and DCFS allows the Kingston Group to continue their activities when those activities have been well known for some time, strains credulity. But hey, what do we know? Obviously, people who rape kids and people who force kids into incestuous marriages at 12, 13, 14 years old with their half-siblings are entitled to due process and the presumption of innocence, even though their activities are pretty well known. And of course, they can transport those kids in 30-degree freezer trucks as they see fit, because it's a free country. And so if you're a polygamous group in Utah, even though the official mainline Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints officially has disavowed polygamy in 2 manifestos, the offshoot groups are kind of an open secret in this state, and they are allowed to continue their criminal conduct with regards to women and children. They've been sued to no avail. They've been busted multiple times at Wakashi Energy for financial fraud, for taxpayer fraud. their women, I mean, their entire group depends on state aid, which they refer to as bleeding the beast. Um, so when a man has umpteen wives that he can't financially support himself, what's he do? He sends them down to the welfare office, where the rest of us, the taxpayers, are expected to foot the bill for his polygamous largesse. And he refers to it, if he's a member of the Kingston Group, as bleeding the beast. And really, we're not the beast. We're just hardworking taxpayers engaged in the horrible crime of monogamy. And, you know, what does that mean for us, according to the originalist teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the contemporary teachings of polygamous groups? Well, that means that we'll be resurrected into one of the two lower levels of heaven without genitalia, and we won't have millions, if not billions, of spirit children because we didn't do what it took in this world, the mortal world, during our mortal probation to enter the highest degree of celestial glory in order to become exalted gods. That's what these people are promoting. Now, you can kind of admire the fact that at least the polygamous groups adhere to the original teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, at least from Brigham Young Ford, possibly from Joseph Smith Ford, depending on which historical sources you believe. There are those who say that Joseph Smith was a monogamist and never really practiced polygamy, and then there are those who say that he did. Whatever side of the fence you want to come down on, at the end of the day, you kind of admire these plucky polygamous groups who are out there practicing polygamy because they believe it's their one shot at exaltation. But they've got to have, 3 or more wives? And the Kingston Groups fall into that category. The only problem is they also fall into a category of believing in bloodline purity, which means they force teenage girls into incestuous marriages with their half-siblings. This, of course, produces the effect that you might expect it to produce. It produces a lot of birth defects. It produces a lot of health issues and whatnot. And, of course, then there's the fact that 12, 13, 14-year-old girls in such a system don't have any real consent or agency. And so they are being sex trafficked to their half-siblings at the behest of the elder-numbered men in the group. So that's what we're faced with here. That's what we're dealing with here in terms of what's going on with Jacob Ortell Scott. And so for those of you who are new to the stream, I'll take this down and I'll show you the video that spurred me to have this live stream in the first place, because it's relevant to recent developments in the state of Utah.
Wednesday, Utah Highway Patrol was investigating an accident on the I-15 near Linden. Officials said the semi came up behind slowed traffic and wasn't able to stop before hitting a minivan. Because it was a commercial vehicle, they brought in a truck inspector who noticed something odd.
He took a photo of the rear of the truck, and there was a slight gap in the door, and he happened to see a set of eyes looking at him as he took that photo. And then he knew we had more problems than just the accident.
Lieutenant Clay Morgan says the driver, 28-year-old Jacob Ortell Scott, admitted to having his 2 younger half-sisters in the back. Officials said the 14 and 12-year-old girls were homeschooled but needed to come to Salt Lake to take a test and help a family member who's having twins. The probable cause statement says the girls had been in the refrigerated trailer, which was cooled to 30 degrees since Huntington, Utah. That's about 2 hours from Linden. Officers said because of the way the door was latched, there was no way for the girls to get themselves out of the trailer. Police arrested Scott on suspicion of aggravated child abuse. They're still investigating the incident. In Salt Lake City, Avery Klanowski, Fox 13 News, Utah.
Now I want you to imagine being a 12 or 14-year-old girl in the back of a freezer truck for 2 hours from Huntington, Utah, in 30-degree temperatures. That's what these people consider normal. That's what they consider acceptable to subject children to. That's what we're up against. Now, it should be obvious that a group that practices these kinds of behaviors would basically be taken out legally. They'd be subject to a RICO prosecution because, in essence, these types of groups practice criminal conduct. They are organized criminal enterprises engaged in everything from welfare fraud to student loan fraud. Oh, that's another feature of the Kingston Group. When they send their girls to college, they don't send them to college to get an education. What they do is they send them to college to get financial aid so that they can get checks in excess of the cost of their tuition and their education expenses, and that money remits to the Kingston Group because it's part of bleeding the beast. And so I want you to understand that fact. I want you to understand the reality that you're up against. I want you to understand that this is going on in the state of Utah right now, that 12 and 13-year-old girls are being subjected to this. They're being stowed in the back of a freezer truck in 30-degree temperatures for 2-hour rides. That's normal with the Kingston Group. Forcing teenage girls to marry their half-siblings, their half-brothers. That's normal in the Kingston Group. The question I have for you is, why in the hell is this permitted? Why has this group, which has been linked to multiple criminal prosecutions, multiple civil lawsuits, been permitted to operate out in the open for as long as it has? Because this is the Utah equivalent of the mob. Okay, this is what these polygamist groups are. And they are criminal enterprises. They are criminal syndicates. They do engage in welfare fraud. They do engage in taxpayer-funded fraud. They call it bleeding the beast. But at the end of the day, they also do things that we should all be able to agree on are just an abomination. That is, they transport a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old girl in the back of a freezer truck for 2 hours in 30-degree temperatures. I cannot say that enough. I can't say that enough. So as I sit here and listen or watch this report, everyone was talking about sex trafficking. Everyone was talking about, how outrageous it was. But it went away, mainly because Charlie Kirk got shot this past week at Utah Valley University. That's another abysmal failure of public safety on the part of the Utah government. But, when a group like the Kingston Group is transporting a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old girl up the highway for 2 hours in a 30-degree freezer truck, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that our government is failing. When David Lee Hamblin, a man I've spent the last 3 years of my life investigating and researching, is able to evade conviction on a single count of sexual abuse when he's on tape, on a recorded line with the Provo Police Department, apologizing to his daughter for raping her, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised. And when Emily Sheets, the victim in the 2022 case against David Lee Hamblin, had 2 eyewitnesses, 2 other victims who were present while David Lee Hamblin was instructing her and her neighbors, Rachel and Eliza Hamblin at the time, on how to fillet him, how to perform oral sex on him. And he was rating their performance. These were between 4 and 6-year-old girls at the time. And he wasn't convicted then. Emily Sheets had 2 eyewitnesses, 2 other victims who had also filled out detailed victim statements in 2013, alleging hundreds of instances of abuse at the hands of their father their mother, Roselle Stevenson, and 5 pages of other names. Over 140 people. Not a single one of those people has been convicted of anything. Not one. In fact, the only person who was charged back in 2013 was David Lee Hamblin. And even with a recorded apology to his daughter, Catherine Hamblin, for raping her, he wasn't convicted of a single crime. That's Utah. After the case was investigated by the Department of Homeland Security, Homeland Security Investigations, Noel Ingalls and Adam Kinnaman, guess what? It went nowhere. COVID happened. They were taken off the case. The files were then transferred over to Mike Smith, the Utah County Sheriff, who I believe only pursued the case because it offered him a cudgel against a county attorney he didn't like, a soft-on-crime prosecutor by the name of David Okerlund Levitt. And so did he prosecute Levitt, even though Levitt was named in those victim statements as a perpetrator? Hell no. Didn't prosecute him one bit. Didn't prosecute anybody else. He brought charges against David Lee Hamblin. Hamblin was arrested for offenses against 2 victims, Emily Sheets, his former neighbor in Provo, and Tobias Schroeder, a young boy who had been brought to Hamlin after being sexually abused by another child out of state. His parents came back to Spring City, realized what had happened to their son. They sought a therapist who could help their son. And on the recommendation of Joe Binion, Hamlin's neighbor, they took him in to David Lee Hamlin, who proceeded to sexually abuse him again. Now, Hamlin admitted to the Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing back in the early 2000s that he had had sex with his patients while he was a therapist, and he tried to convince them that it was part of their therapy. And he lost his license, but the Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing never expanded their investigation beyond the patients that Hamblin admitted to abusing. If they had, they would have found what I found over the past 3 years, which is dozens of other victims. Dozens of people that Hamblin abused while he was a therapist and even after he was a therapist. That's the level. And so the context here, the 2 girls in this freezer truck, transported by somebody who is probably a member of the Kingston Group, Jacob Ortell Scott, who is tied to an address which relates to Ralph Anderson, who runs the Orders Farm operations in Huntington, runs a dairy farm. In that context, it all makes sense. Because in the state of Utah, you don't have this occurring in a vacuum. What you have is a cultural normalization of child abuse, where people don't bat an eye. They say, well, the cab of the truck was full. So they had to transport those girls somehow. So what did they do? They stuck them in the back of the truck in a 30-degree freezer. And for 2 hours, they were transported down the highway. They would have never been found or detected or taken out of the custody of Jacob Ortell Scott and their family had Mr. Scott not collided with a car and had the Utah Highway Patrol not seen them peering through a gap in the truck's door, like the sliding door on the back. So in this context, everything that I've mentioned, this is perfectly normal. It's just another day in Utah. Originally, people thought it was sex trafficking, and they were like, no, he's actually the half-brother of these 2 girls. And he was transporting them up north because they're homeschooled. They need to take a test. Now, why they couldn't take the test in Huntington, where they're purportedly from, where they were being transported from, anybody's guess. But, of course, they had to take a test, and they also had to help one of their older pregnant siblings with her pregnancy. Because, again, these are children who are enlisted into forced labor and labor trafficking at the behest of polygamous groups like the Kingstons, or as they call themselves, the Order. So this is part and parcel of what we're dealing with here in the state of Utah. And I can't stress it enough. Like, something is foul in this state. And I'm going to continue covering this story with Jacob Ortell Scott and these two girls in the freezer truck. And I think I'm going to expand the focus of my research and my investigation to polygamous groups like the Kingston Group. Because the state of Utah has more or less shit the bed when it comes to prosecuting David Lee Hamblin. But you know what? If I'm going to pick a fight, I might as well pick a fight with a criminal enterprise like the Kingston Group, or the Davis County Cooperative, or the Order, or any of the other names that they go by. So you can look forward to more content on that because, I personally, not being a Utah native and being an ex-Mormon, have a problem with polygamy, first off, and I have a real problem with the idea that you would transport a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old girl in the back of a freezer truck in 30-degree temperatures for 2 hours or longer had you not gotten into an accident and been busted by the Utah Highway Patrol. It's just an abomination. We should all be upset about it. But a lot of us aren't. Like, that's the reality. And the people I'm looking to reach with this content, what I would say to you is, you're the people I'm trying to convert here. You're the people I'm trying to get to come off of the sidelines and say that this is wrong. It's wrong that the Kingston Group commits welfare fraud. It's wrong that they commit financial aid fraud when they send their kids to college, to apply for college, to be admitted to college, only to get the excess financial aid and line their pockets with it. It's wrong that they engage in forced labor trafficking with a 7 or 8-year-old, as I covered earlier in this podcast, earlier in this stream. It's just wrong that they operate according to one set of rules and the rest of us have to operate according to the law. That is unacceptable. And so what I would say to you is, in the coming days and weeks, you're going to see more of that content coming at you as I cover what the Kingston Group and other organized sexual abuse groups do to children. Because it ought to be something we can all agree on. It needs to be stopped. And we need to mount public pressure on our law enforcement and our prosecutors to put a stop to it, to engage in actual RICO prosecutions against these types of groups. This is Goel, and I'm signing off for the night. I'll be generating some other content later related to the weekend review, and I will be posting it on YouTube. But I felt like this was a story that needed to be covered, and it needed to be linked to the Kingston Group because I believe that they are responsible for Mr. Jacob Ortell Scott's activities. So, have a good night. I'll talk to you later.